The person who keeps attracting the same kind of unavailable partner doesn't usually recognize they're the common variable in every failed relationship. They frame it as bad luck, as the universe testing them, as evidence they need to manifest harder, visualize more clearly, raise their vibration to finally attract what they deserve. And here's where the law of attraction becomes not just ineffective, but actively harmful. It takes a psychological pattern, the compulsive repetition of unresolved trauma, and repackages it as a spiritual problem with a magical solution. Instead of looking at why they're unconsciously drawn to people who replicate early attachment wounds, instead of examining what familiar pain they're trying to master through repetition, the person blames their thoughts, their energy, their failure to believe strongly enough in what they say they want. The pattern continues not because the manifestation technique is wrong, but because the underlying psychological structure generating the pattern remains completely unexamined. The law of attraction doesn't just fail to address repeating patterns, it actively obscures them, redirecting attention away from the unconscious material that needs integration and toward an imaginary future where better thoughts, more positive energy, or stronger belief will finally produce different results, which never happens, because thoughts don't create reality in any direct causal sense. But unconscious patterns absolutely do create the consistent tendency to notice certain things while filtering out others, to interpret ambiguous situations through a particular lens, and to make choices that feel free but are actually constrained by psychological structures operating completely below conscious awareness. The appeal of law of attraction frameworks is psychologically obvious once you examine it. They promise control in a chaotic world, simple causality where complexity feels overwhelming, and the flattering idea that you're powerful enough to shape external reality through intention and focused thought alone. If you're successful, it's because you manifested it through correct application of universal laws. If you're not struggling, it's because you haven't mastered the technique yet, which means the solution is just more effort in the same direction. More affirmations, more detailed visualization, more energetic alignment with what you want. This creates a closed self-reinforcing system where the framework can never be disproven by experience. Success confirms it works. Failure confirms you're doing it wrong or blocking your own manifestation with unconscious resistance. And crucially, it locates both the problem and solution entirely within the individual, which means systemic issues, material constraints, historical context, and psychological patterns operating below conscious awareness all get ignored or reinterpreted as manifestations of incorrect thinking. Someone stuck in generational poverty isn't dealing with structural economic realities and limited access to resources. They're just vibrating at the wrong frequency. Someone repeatedly drawn to abusive relationships isn't working through unresolved attachment trauma from childhood. They're just attracting their inner state, which means they can change it by thinking differently. The framework is unfalsifiable, which in science is a fatal flaw indicating the theory can't make meaningful predictions, but in spiritual marketplaces is actually a feature. It can't be proven wrong through experience, which makes it feel true. And it places responsibility for change entirely on the individual's thoughts and beliefs, which feels empowering even when it's actually just sophisticated victim blaming dressed up in cosmic language and quantum metaphors. What actually explains repeating patterns isn't thoughts creating reality through vibrational alignment with universal laws. It's unconscious psychological structures shaping attention, interpretation, emotional response, and behavioral choice in predictable, consistent ways that produce similar outcomes across different contexts and relationships. Freud called this repetition compulsion, the tendency to recreate and reenact unresolved trauma in an unconscious attempt to master it, to finally get it right, to produce a different outcome this time, even though the underlying structure remains unchanged. Someone who experienced abandonment in early childhood doesn't consciously decide to seek out partners who will eventually leave. but they're drawn to people who are emotionally unavailable, commitment phobic, or otherwise unlikely to provide secure attachment because that dynamic feels familiar, and familiarity registers unconsciously as safety, even when the familiar thing is objectively painful or destructive. The unconscious isn't trying to hurt you or sabotage your happiness. It's trying to create conditions where the original wound can finally be resolved differently, where this time the unavailable person chooses you and proves that you're worthy of consistent love. But because the entire pattern is unconscious, the person doesn't recognize what they're doing or why. They experience it as happening to them. Bad luck, poor judgment by others, cosmic unfairness, or evidence they need to manifest better, rather than as something their own psyche is actively orchestrating, selecting for, and perpetuating through subtle behavioral cues and interpretive frameworks they're not aware of using. And without that fundamental recognition, the pattern just repeats endlessly. Each iteration feels subjectively like a new situation with different people, but structurally, it's the same dynamic playing out with different actors in different contexts, and the common thread is the person's unconscious psychological structure, not the universe responding to their thoughts. Jung's significant contribution was showing that these patterns aren't just personal and biographical, they're also archetypal, shaped by collective psychological structures that exist deeper than individual life history. But the mechanism is still psychological, not magical or metaphysical. The shadow, everything about yourself you can't consciously accept or acknowledge and therefore must project onto others or situations, doesn't manifest people into your life through vibrational alignment or energetic frequency. It shapes who you notice in a crowded room, how you interpret their behavior and intentions, what you unconsciously communicate through body language and subtle behavioral cues. That influences how they respond to you, and what you remember or forget about interactions based on whether it confirms your existing psychological structures. If you can't acknowledge your own anger because you learned early that anger is dangerous or unacceptable, you'll project it outward. You'll see anger in others where it may not actually exist, or you'll unconsciously provoke it through passive-aggressive behavior, or you'll be drawn to people who express anger freely because they're carrying and expressing what you can't consciously own in yourself. And then you'll experience your life as full of angry, aggressive, or hostile people, which from your subjective perspective confirms something about the world, about your bad luck, about how people treat you. But what it actually confirms is that your shadow is actively shaping your perceptual and relational field in predictable ways, not through magic or universal laws, through the well-documented psychological mechanisms of projection, selective attention, confirmation bias, and behavioral cueing that create feedback loops between internal psychological states and external social realities. The law of attraction frameworks systematically hijack confirmation bias, the deeply ingrained cognitive tendency to notice, remember, and weight more heavily information that supports existing beliefs, while filtering out, forgetting, or minimizing contradictory data that would challenge those beliefs. Someone practicing manifestation techniques will naturally notice and remember the times when something they wanted appeared in their life, and will attribute its appearance to the practice, to their successful manifestation work. They'll forget or minimize the many times it didn't work, the times coincidence or their own practical effort explained the outcome better than manifestation, the times their desires changed over time, making past manifestations irrelevant or even problematic. This isn't deliberate dishonesty or self-deception in any malicious sense. It's simply how human memory and attention work by default. We're pattern-making, meaning-generating machines, and we're especially skilled at constructing narratives that preserve our sense of agency, control, and coherence in the face of randomness and uncertainty. Believing you manifested your career success feels psychologically better than acknowledging the enormous role of privilege, timing, luck, and systems beyond your individual control. Believing you attracted your suffering through negative thoughts or low vibration feels paradoxically more tolerable than accepting that randomness, systemic forces, and factors beyond your control significantly shape outcomes. Because if suffering is your fault, at least theoretically, you can fix it by thinking differently, raising your energy, or perfecting the manifestation technique. If it's structural, random, or beyond your control, you have to tolerate genuine uncertainty and powerlessness, which is psychologically much harder, despite being considerably more accurate to how reality actually works. The real damage happens when people use law of attraction thinking to systematically avoid doing actual psychological work that would address the underlying patterns. Instead of examining why they keep choosing emotionally unavailable partners, they affirm that their perfect soulmate relationship is manifesting and coming soon. Instead of addressing the psychological reasons they self-sabotage at work whenever success becomes imminent, they visualize career achievement and financial abundance. Instead of confronting and working through family trauma that shaped their attachment patterns, they try to manifest healing, wholeness, or release from the past. And when the pattern inevitably continues, because of course it does, because positive thoughts and visualization don't override unconscious psychological structures built over years or decades, they interpret the failure as insufficient manifestation skill, unconscious blocks they haven't cleared yet, or resistance they haven't overcome, rather than as clear feedback that they're looking in entirely the wrong place for solutions. The real pattern, the psychological one generating the compulsive repetition, remains completely invisible and therefore can't be addressed. And the longer it remains invisible and unexamined, the more deeply entrenched it becomes, because repetition without conscious awareness is just practice. You're getting better at enacting the pattern more efficiently, more automatically, with less conscious thought, all while believing you're doing healing or growth work because you're saying affirmations and visualizing different results that never actually materialize. Working with actual repeating patterns requires starting from completely different premises that most people find initially uncomfortable or even threatening. First premise, the pattern is information, not punishment. It's not bad luck, not the universe testing you, not manifestation of negative thoughts or low vibration. It's the psyche's way of showing you something that urgently needs conscious attention, something your conscious mind hasn't been willing or able to see directly. Second premise, the pattern is fundamentally yours, even when it seems entirely about other people. They keep leaving, they keep being critical or cruel, they keep disappointing or betraying you. The structural commonality across all these situations is you, not in a blaming or shaming way, but in a simple structural way. Something in your psychological makeup is unconsciously selecting for these people, interpreting their behavior through a particular distorting lens and eliciting particular responses through your own unconscious behavior patterns. Third premise, the pattern won't change through different thoughts, more positive energy, or better manifestation techniques. It will change only through the difficult work of making unconscious material conscious, which necessarily means looking at what you've been avoiding, feeling what you've been systematically suppressing, and recognizing how your defenses against old pain are actively creating current pain in predictable ways. One concrete way to start working with patterns is through rigorous documentation without premature interpretation. When the same type of situation repeats, same relationship dynamic, same work conflict, same social friction, same self-sabotage at a familiar point, write down what actually happened with as much behavioral specificity and detail as. Not the story about what it means, not your emotional reaction or interpretation, just the observable sequence of events. Who said what specific words? Who did what specific actions? What you felt in your body at each point? What you wanted to say but didn't allow yourself to express? What you did instead? What the other person's response was? Then, once you have several of these documented, look for structural similarities across incidents that happened in completely different contexts with different people. Are you always the one pursuing while the other withdraws? Are you consistently the one accommodating and pleasing while feeling resentful underneath? Do you repeatedly end up in situations where you feel fundamentally unseen, misunderstood, or undervalued? These structural commonalities point directly toward the organizing psychological pattern. And that pattern, when you can see it clearly, stripped of all the contextual details that make each incident feel unique, usually connects to something much earlier in your development, a way of relating learned in childhood that made adaptive sense then, given the family system, but doesn't serve you now. A defense mechanism that protected you once from overwhelming feelings, but now creates the very painful situations it's designed to prevent. The second dimension involves asking what the pattern is trying to accomplish on behalf of the psyche. This requires temporarily suspending the automatic assumption that the pattern is bad, stupid, or something you're doing wrong that needs to be criticized and stopped. From the unconscious's perspective, the pattern is actually adaptive. It's trying to solve a problem, usually a very old problem from early development. Someone who keeps attracting critical romantic partners might be unconsciously trying to finally win approval and acceptance from a critical parent by getting someone similar to voluntarily choose them, validate them, see their worth. It won't work because the pattern is playing out with the wrong people in the wrong time. Current romantic partners aren't the parent, and even if they were, adult romantic love fundamentally can't heal childhood wounds. Attachment wounds that needed to be addressed at a specific developmental stage. But the unconscious doesn't know that, doesn't understand time in that way. It just knows the wound exists and keeps creating conditions where maybe this time it can be resolved. This time, the unavailable person will become available and prove your worth. Understanding this fundamental shift in perspective, from "why do I keep doing this stupid self-destructive thing" to "what is this pattern trying to accomplish for me? What problem is it trying to solve?" opens up psychological space for compassion and curiosity instead of harsh self-judgment. And from that space of compassionate curiosity, actual change becomes genuinely possible rather than just another should imposed from the outside. A third practice involves working consciously with the fantasy or ideal that the pattern is psychologically organized around. Often, the compulsive repetition involves chasing something that feels like it would finally make you fundamentally okay, complete, or acceptable. The perfect relationship that proves your lovability, the impressive achievement that proves your worth, the external validation that finally quiets the internal critic. And the pattern persists precisely because that thing keeps not arriving, which means you have to keep trying, keep pursuing, keep hoping the next iteration will be different. But what if the fantasy itself is actually the core problem? What if the reason it never arrives in satisfying form is that unconsciously it's designed not to arrive? Because arriving would mean confronting the much more painful fear that even if you got it, you'd still feel the same fragmented, inadequate, or empty inside. Someone chasing the perfect partner to feel whole avoids recognizing that they feel psychologically fragmented for developmental reasons the partner fundamentally can't fix. Someone chasing achievement and recognition to feel valuable avoids recognizing that they internalized the message early that their inherent worth is conditional, earned through performance rather than given through existence. The fantasy isn't really about getting the thing. It's about avoiding the pain of realizing the thing won't do what you desperately need it to do. And as long as you're chasing, striving, trying to manifest, you don't have to face that fundamental truth. So unconsciously, the pattern continues, not because manifestation isn't working, but because at a deeper level, you need it not to work. Success would actually be more psychologically threatening than continued failure in pursuit. The fourth method requires sitting with and gradually metabolizing the actual feeling the pattern exists to defend against. This is consistently the hardest part and most often requires skilled therapeutic support, because the feelings involved, typically shame, grief, terror, rage, or some combination, are precisely what drove the pattern into unconscious territory in the first place. They were too overwhelming to handle when they first arose, usually in childhood when you lacked the developmental capacity to process them. So the psyche developed elaborate and often ingenious defenses to avoid ever feeling them fully again. The repeating pattern is one of those defenses. It keeps you busy, keeps you hoping, keeps you focused externally on fixing situations and other people rather than feeling what's underneath driving the whole mechanism. But that feeling doesn't go away or diminish just because it's unconscious and defended against. It runs the pattern from below. It shapes your choices, your perceptions, your emotional reactions, your behavioral impulses in ways that keep recreating the conditions that produce more of the same painful feeling, which then drives more defensive behavior, which creates more pattern repetition in an accelerating cycle. The only way out is through. Deliberately, carefully, with proper support and pacing, allowing yourself to gradually feel what the pattern exists to help you avoid feeling. This isn't accomplished in one dramatic session. It's often months or years of gradually approaching, sitting with, and metabolizing emotional material that's been walled off and defended against since childhood. But it's the only intervention that actually changes the pattern at its structural source, rather than just managing symptoms or integration of one defense with another. Integration of this work happens slowly through repeated small actions that systematically challenge the pattern without overwhelming the psychological system's capacity to handle change. If the pattern is always accommodating others while ignoring or suppressing your own needs and desires, integration isn't suddenly becoming aggressively demanding or selfishly focused only on yourself. It's saying no once to something relatively small, sitting with the uncomfortable feelings that arise when you do, and noticing that you survive the other person's reaction without catastrophe. If the pattern is pursuing emotionally unavailable people, integration isn't forcing yourself to date someone you find boring just because they're technically available and interested. It's noticing the familiar pull toward unavailability when it arises in real time, pausing instead of acting on it immediately through automatic impulse, and exploring with curiosity what makes availability feel threatening, uninteresting, or somehow wrong. If the pattern is self-sabotaging whenever success becomes imminent, integration isn't using positive thinking to push through to achievement. It's examining what success would actually mean psychologically, what identity shift it would require, what fear or threat it triggers unconsciously, and then taking small, deliberate actions towards success while consciously holding the fear instead of letting it run the sabotage program unconsciously. Over time, with consistent practice, what emerges isn't the complete absence of patterns. Humans are fundamentally pattern-making creatures, and that's adaptive and necessary for functioning. But rather the growing capacity to recognize patterns as they're forming in real time, and to make conscious choices about whether to enact them. The pull toward the emotionally unavailable partner doesn't magically disappear, but you see it clearly enough to pause and ask whether following that pull actually serves your well-being or just repeats the familiar dynamic that produces pain. The impulse to accommodate others at your own expense still arises from conditioning, but you catch it before it becomes automatic behavior and can choose differently based on what the situation actually requires. The fear that historically triggers self-sabotage still exists in your nervous system, but you can feel it, name it accurately, and act despite it or differently with it rather than being unconsciously controlled and driven by it. This is the actual version of what law of attraction frameworks promise but fundamentally can't deliver. Not magical control over external reality through thoughts and vibration, but growing conscious awareness of internal psychological reality and how it shapes the external experiences you create, select for, interpret, and participate in. Not manifestation through positive thinking, but integration through making unconscious material conscious. Not raising your vibration to attract better circumstances, but lowering your psychological defenses enough to see what's actually driving the repeating patterns, and making conscious, informed choices based on that awareness instead of remaining unconsciously bound to repeat the same dynamics while hoping for magically different results through techniques that don't address the actual mechanism. The person from the opening who keeps attracting unavailable partners and blames their manifestation technique for failing them has fundamentally two divergent paths forward. They can keep trying different versions of the same magical framework, different teachers, different visualization methods, different energetic techniques, with each repeated failure reinforcing the belief that they just haven't found the right method yet, that they're blocking themselves somehow, that they need to try harder or believe more strongly. Or they can get genuinely curious about the pattern itself as meaningful information. What does unavailability actually feel like in the body when encountered? Where have they felt that specific feeling before? And when? And in what relationships? What would it concretely mean if a partner were actually available, present, and committed? What intimacy would that require? What vulnerability would that demand? What parts of themselves would they have to reveal that currently feel impossible or dangerous to show? The answers to those questions won't come from affirmations, visualization, or raising vibration. They'll come from sustained, honest self-examination, probably with skilled therapeutic support, often requiring years of patient, uncomfortable work sitting with material that's been avoided for decades, which is considerably harder and far less appealing than believing you just need to think better thoughts or apply the manifestation formula correctly. But it's also the only approach that actually works to change repeating patterns at their source. Because the pattern fundamentally isn't about the universe responding to your energy or thoughts. It's about your psyche trying desperately to resolve something that can't be resolved through compulsive repetition, only through conscious recognition, direct feeling, and gradual integration. And that work, while genuinely difficult and often painful, is actually possible, unlike manifesting reality through positive thoughts, which isn't.